Conversations across time. Oh.
Yeah.
All right. Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across time.
Good evening and welcome to Conversations Across Time. This is a series that we've been doing for the past 2 weeks. This is our final phase of this particular topic. But if you've been watching for the past 2 weeks, you know that it's been rather exciting. It's been very interesting to see how our guests have talked about our topic. And the overall topic is labor. Could organized labor exist in today's climate? Now, when I say that this was a very fiery conversation last week, you can remember that even your host unfortunately was fired up because I ended by asking a question which I'm going to repeat. So I'm not asking you to forgive me for it. I'm just going to just go with it because this is what we do on Conversations Across Time. And that was that this week we want to talk about yes, we're talking about organized labor, but we are also asking in that context, in that historical overview, my question was, what the hell happened to Ronnie? How did he go? How did President Ronald Reagan in his youth be the type of person that he was, a person who invited when football players weren't allowed to stay at the hotel, when he was involved with sports, he invited them to stay at his home. That when he was a football player, his football team. So I'm just saying, how did he go from the young man on that football team and morph through his various stages to become the 40th president of the United States? So with that, I'm going to ask our guests again. Tonight we have with us Mr. Debs.
I'm Eugene V. Debs. I organized the Industrial Workers of the World, which is an industrial union. Everybody could belong. I also ran for president 5 times as the Socialist Party's candidate. And I believe the only salvation for workers is one giant union to fight the capitalist class.
Mr. Gompers.
Good evening. I am Samuel Gompers. For a very long time, I was the president of the American Federation of Labor, a federation of trade unions dedicated to uplifting the social and political well-being of workers.
President Reagan.
Good evening. I'm Ronald Reagan. I was the 40th president of the United States. I served 2 successful terms as president from 1981 to 1989. Prior to that, I was the governor of California. And prior to that, I was the head of a union, the Screen Actors Guild. We'll discuss whether or not unions have a place in politics today. I know they had a place in politics in the past, but whether or not what the future holds for labor unions and the labor organization in general. Thank you.
So what I want to say to you gentlemen is that from your perch, we know that this is beyond your time, hence Conversations Across Time, but from your historical perspective, what do you have any notion as to how we come to be at our present day situation of the alienation and the separation, just the total combative nature of relationships between various groups, and where did that begin? How could we have, and I know that you're aware of the situation that happened on January 6th. These were people who were alienated, who were, for the most part, blue collar workers who just don't believe in what this country stands for. Where did that come from? How did that start? And I'm asking that question, and I'm throwing that out. Mr. Gompers, you were fired up last week. You have any idea? Any ideas on that?
Well, to be honest, Ms. Crawford, it's been a long process to bring workers to this point. I've always tried to make workers understand that the real enemy is not their fellow workers. The real enemy is this capitalist class who keeps workers divided. Now, I must confess, in the craft unions and building trades unions that I represented, they were predominantly dominated by white males. And for a brief time, like during the 50s and 60s, white male workers were very well paid for their labor, and deservedly so. However, with the recessions in the 70s, certain politicians had the bright idea of instead of seriously dealing with the racial problems and the labor problems, trying to allow working people of both classes, of all races, to work together. Instead of that, they ran political campaigns that demanded racial division, pitting formerly somewhat semi-privileged white workers against people of color, workers of color, and women who tried to began to assert themselves in all fields, including the labor force. And the politicians try to persuade these workers that these people of color would take their jobs away. And we've tried for very long and now we have this. We have working people, I'm sorry to say, white working people, to live with the idea that Donald Trump, this alleged billionaire who never worked a day in his life, who got bailed out by his father's money and losing money in the casino business of all things, was constantly bailed out, never had to worry about anything in his life, never had to miss a meal or worry about a paycheck or whatever. They believe that this failure of a human being from a comfortable background was their savior. And this job of the labor movement, as I see it from my perch in heaven, is to let workers know that the fellow workers of color are not your enemy. It is the capitalist class and their media shills, such as Mr. Reagan was, those are the enemy.
Now, I want to ask Mr. Debs for his perspective in that during the time that you were alive, Mr. Gompers, a lot of the policies that you just protested, you supported. You were anti-immigrant, saying that they would take jobs, which seems to be a part of what's going on now. But I'll let Mr. Debs respond.
Well, first of all, it's interesting that Sam referred to those white working class people who now supported Trump. They originally turned, and they were all, not all, but most of them were union members. They were originally called Reagan Democrats. They were people who were members of the Democratic Party who in They voted for President Reagan in both of his elections.
In
And these are-
1980, they were, yes,
and
absolutely.
they were called Reagan Democrats. The Democrats had an overwhelming registration majority, but these white working class union members, for lots of reasons, Mr. Gompers alluded to some, that they were afraid of the changing nature of the color of the population in the United States. They were fearful of the new technology that was moving in on the types of jobs and the union jobs they had, like coal mining and oil rigging and things like that. They were referred to as Reagan Democrats, and they are the very people that supported your President Trump. And I agree with Sam in that. And I've been in my time, and if I came back, I would say the same thing. The only salvation for the workers is to unite all workers, whether they're skilled or unskilled, whether they're black or white, whether they're male or female, et cetera, et cetera. And that's how you would fight the capitalist class who exploits the worker. The workers create the wealth, and they don't get their fair share of the creation. And that's very simple. And the political system is so broken because people believe the propaganda. People believe you had a law called Citizens United, which allowed all kind of corporations to contribute all kind of unlimited money. And one of the arguments they made is, well, the labor unions have the same right. Yeah, but there's 20,000 giant corporations compared to the very few labor unions there have. And then you have right to work laws where you can't collect dues from people who don't belong in the union. So how's the union going to get money? And President Reagan, you supported these right to work laws. I believe they're in your country now. I think in the United States now, I think there's 27 states that have right to work laws where you can get all the benefits of whatever the workers get, and you don't have to pay any dues to the union. So how can the union exist in those countries? What I like to know, and it's an interesting question, and I don't know the answer. These men who were good union guys, they supported Gompers, they supported the other leaders that took over the AFL and the CIO, John L. Lewis and Walter Reuther. How they turned from being good union Democrats to conservative Republicans. And I'll ask Mr. Reagan because he followed the same path. What caused you to go from a liberal Democrat, from a supporter of your hero? I believe Franklin Roosevelt was one of your heroes. You modeled a lot of your propaganda speeches on TV after President Roosevelt's fireside chats. What stimulated you to move from a liberal, and you belong to a lot of different liberal organizations, a liberal Democrat to an ultra-conservative Republican?
Well, a lot had to do with, first of all, times prior to the time prior to me, I became president. I saw the light. I saw in which direction the country was moving and what was best for the citizens of the country. When I became president, I had a major labor issue that happened in 1981, right after I became president, where the flight controllers, who, by the way, supported me, one of the few unions that supported me in my election bid to become president, they went out on strike for more wages and for apparently better working conditions. Well, they were flight controllers. They were federal workers. There was a law that prevented them from going on strike. There was no law that prevented them from bargaining collectively, but there was a law that prevented them from going out on strike. And the reason for the law was because it affected general commerce in the country. Everything would break down. The planes couldn't fly. People couldn't travel. Businesses couldn't ship goods. The economy would crumble. So it was in a better
businesses couldn't ship goods. You see, you see what's important. President.
Well, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's right. If businesses can't ship goods, then workers have no place to work. That's the issue. You're talking about. You want to talk about businesses on one side, but if there were no businesses, there'd be no workers at all.
I agree. Point taken.
The union. Okay. Okay.
I must point
Now,
out that
let's
if it
let
wasn't,
me
if it-
I want to address an
Huh?
issue. I
Yeah.
want to address an issue that Mr. Gomper talked about the people in the insurrection on January the 6th. Looking at it from my historical perspective, it's very interesting because the people who the unions, by the way, supported the presidency of Donald Trump, the Republican presidency of Donald Trump. The unions did. Now, were those people die hard union people? Absolutely not. Those people were racists. They were anti-Semites. They were right-wing activists. They were the people who supported them and had nothing to do with labor. Nothing to do with having.
They were your supporters, President Reagan. They were Reagan Democrats. So they must have thought you were racist as well. And I think you
Workers unite to get a better work. What happened over time was that you know all about teachers. Teachers were unionized. Kids couldn't go to school? Of course not. How about if police officers went on strike? How about if firemen went on strike? How about if the soldiers went on strike?
You talked about the public good and you misspoke about your role in the air traffic controller strike. The main reason the aircraft traffic controllers went on strike was because they were stressed out. They were working too hard. They were putting in too many hours. They were putting in overtime. And that was a threat to the safety and welfare of people who are using flight travel. So for you to say that by going on strike, they were against the national interest is the biggest falsehood that I can imagine. The truth of the matter is they were interested in the health, safety, welfare of everyone because they were saying the way you are exploiting us in the workplace is a threat to the health and safety of people who travel by air. So you misspoke, and that's how you misspoke when you justified breaking that union in the first place. And you are no better than any of the other union, going back to Andrew Carnegie, going back to Mr. Frick, going back to all the union busters throughout history. You cannot use your presidency of SAG and give you a clean slate for what you did and what you did to the union movement in this country. And I don't know how you came to that belief, because you would have never believed that if the moguls in the movie industry said, all right, we're closing down all the movies and all the workers are fired, all the actors are fired, and we're going to get the Munchkins to do all our movies. So
this is not the movie business. This was the airlines.
Well, but you misspoke. You talked about wages, and they were mainly, the strike was mainly about them being stressed out and not being able to do their job because they were working too many hours. And it's a critical thing that you can't be tired and you can't be stressed out and do that job.
So I think
they broke the law. They broke the law.
I must point out.
But hold on one
Mr.
second.
Reagan, excuse me.
I think what we have to make clear, what we have to make sure that we put a point on or highlight is that Mr. Deb's position is that the safety of the citizenry was at risk because of the poor working conditions of the air traffic controllers. And is that correct, Mr. Deb?
That's absolutely correct. And President Reagan espoused the same propaganda. You can make that case for any strike when the workers want better conditions for their own workers. You can say, well, if the clothing workers go on strike, there won't be any skirts for the women and they won't be able to cover their body. You can make that excuse for anybody. So the problem is, why would you break a union, destroy a union? I know the federal police couldn't, strike, but they were striking for a good cause. They were striking for the safety of your very citizens, probably most of them, because the poor people don't fly that much. Most of them were your supporters. And yet I truly believe that it was your advisors and the business community that contributed to your campaign, that pushed you to break the union because they knew down the road the only way, because their innovative skills, their intelligence to create more was waning. And the only way they could keep their profit levels up is to exploit labor. And that's been the mantra since workers existed on this earth. So please don't talk about the national welfare and the national safety and state it correctly.
Gene,
Well, let me just say this. Let me just say this. If I wouldn't have done if I did what I did, it was distasteful to the people of this country, I certainly would have never won an election 3 years later by 99% of the electoral vote, by the people of the United States who voted me in. So if it was such a damnable act that I did, I certainly wouldn't have gotten that kind of support from the people of the United States.
Mr. Gompers,
Furthermore, the unions fell on themselves over the years because of all of the abuses that they did. I'm not saying that the original concept of unionism was bad, because I believed in it from the very beginning and I acted in it.
That's
But
what we're
they did
asking
so
you. What
many
made you
things that
change?
were wrong.
What made you?
But you can't put it all on me, because that change was coming over.
wait a minute, and that's why I want to go to Mr. Gompers, because Mr. Gompers, you last week you were fired up. And now what's happened is President Reagan has managed to get Mr. Debs to be fired up. But can you jump in here for a moment and just give us an overview of from your perspective?
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. I'm with Gene on this. Mr. Reagan, you talk piously about the laws must be enforced and the public safety must be enforced. Time and time again in labor history, the state used the state with the courts and the police and the militias use any excuse whatsoever to to suppress unions and their attempts to organize workers. Well, that's the way it's always been. So many politicians and judges have been corrupted by the capitalist class, as Gene will attest, and they've used any legal excuse to suppress unions. And you talk piously about repressing this union, which supported you, and instead of saying, sit down, guys, let's talk, you just repress them. I mean, you're not very loyal to those that are loyal to you. And as for your political development, late in the 1940s, supporters of President Franklin Roosevelt, including yourself, helped to organize the Americans for Democratic Action, which continued the New Deal tradition. And you were a part of that. You're part of the organization. And there's even reports that you even tried to apply for membership in the Communist Party. And all of a sudden, how did you sell out? Who bought you up? General Electric, who tried with their GE Theater that you were the host, or maybe 20 Mule Team Borax with Death Valley Days? Someone paid you off along the way.
All corporations that employed President Reagan, we should say for our viewers' edification, General Electric and that 20 Mule Team Borax.
That was the product.
Yes, that was those products. But I mean, they afforded him a lifestyle which eventually, I mean, had to do with, when we talk about what happened, had to do with leading to your divorce from your first wife, Jane Wyman, because she was upset that you were so involved in politics as a result of having worked for General Electric. You saw that you had a mouth, you had a megaphone to use. So that was what led to the end of that marriage. And I don't know if anybody wants to talk about the second marriage, because
I can talk about it.
I'm going to hold my tongue.
I'm going to talk about it.
Mr. Debs.
Well, I don't know what converted them, and the only thing I can think of is we both had a similar problem. We had wives that didn't agree with our social, economic, and political philosophies. Although I uh, didn't let my wife influence me at all, and I think President Reagan's wife, but more importantly, the people that surrounded his wife, influenced his thinking, and eventually. As missionaries do, converted him to the conservative philosophy. He was never a true conservative until he got married to Nancy, until he got involved with these ultra right wing conservatives, John Birchers and people like that. So I don't want to, say anything bad about anybody's marriage, but I had a similar problem. My wife hated socialism. She was one of the middle class life, and I was able to withstand her pressure. And I'm not sure Mr. Reagan could withstand the pressure of Nancy.
Yes,
Mr.
and
Gompers?
the fact about Mr. Reagan, he's just he doesn't impress me as a very deep thinker, if he's a thinker at all. I mean, they just hand him a script and he reads it, and
Oh.
and he just does what he's told when he's told to do it. Like
You said,
I mean,
he
he's an
was
actor.
reading
I
from a
mean,
script.
that-
He was reading from a script while he was as during his presidency. He was just reading from scripts that were handed to him.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it was. I mean, he was an actor. He was an actor, and he just the capitalist class just gave him a script to read. They went along with him because they paid him off, and that proved to Mr. Reagan that these are wonderful guys to work with. I have to be loyal to them. They're my friends. But when I dealt with the capitalist class, the Carnegies, the Mellons, the Rockefellers, those guys, I knew they weren't friends of the working class. I knew that they had glad-handed me, called me Sam, had drinks with them. But I knew they, if it suited their purpose, they would have betrayed me. And they would have betrayed you, Mr. Reagan, if it suited their purpose.
Now, you know what? Believe it or not, we are actually at the end of this most delightful series, and I am going to, in deference to everything that has happened with this conversation, I am going to throw it to President Reagan, because I want to let him wrap us up. You've heard from Mr. Gompers, you've heard from Mr. Debs. Pretty much, I've never been one to be able to hide my feelings about certain things, but I want President Reagan, what do you want to close us out with?
All I want to say is they don't want to give me credit for the things that I really did well. I got rid of the Soviet Union, fought communism, got an anti-nuclear treaty pact in place. I did everything that I could do for the American people. If the unions are not the political power that they are today, that they were in the days when I was a member of the union, it's because of the problems that they caused by themselves, or the union problems that they caused. Other than that, I was a union guy. And if my wife tended to move me in a different direction, well, maybe she did. But the bottom line was that I was very successful at what I did. And I'm still looked at as very successful. And the unions, unfortunately, are not. Thank you.
Wow. Oh, well, I gave you the last word, and we just have to leave it there. I am so grateful to you three gentlemen, Mr. Gompers, President Reagan, Mr. Debs. I am so grateful for this conversation. It has been illuminating, and I hope our audience had as much fun with this discussion as we had bringing it. It has been a blast. And so I ask you to tune in next week when we have another exciting conversation, but it's going to be hard to top this series. Thank you very much. I am Vivienne Crawford on behalf of Conversations Across Time, and on behalf of my wonderful and spirited guests, Mr. Samuel Gompers and President Ronald Reagan and Mr. Eugene Debs. We say good night and enjoy. Thank you.
Conversation across time. Conversation, conversation, conversation across the town. Conversation, conversation across town. Conversation across town. Conversation across town. Conversation across